Hi, everyone. Welcome to Wine.com Experiences. I'm Gwendolyn Osborne. We are so excited to have you here today. We're going to be taking a tour of the Rhône Valley with two of the most well-known proprietors in the area, Christoph Bristielle of Chateau La Nert and Jean-Luc Colombo. For those of you who submitted questions beforehand, thank you. We are going to try to be incorporating those into our conversation. If you purchase the wines ahead of time from Wine.com, fantastic. Please go ahead and get those open, get them into some glassware. Yes, I know we have 4 wines tonight, so it might be a little bit intimidating, but I do encourage you to open them and taste them. These are really high quality wines and they will last for a few days at least in your fridge, and the reds might even be better tomorrow. That said, if you'd like, you can always come and revisit this video on our Wine.com YouTube page. That's where all of our videos live. You can also find more detailed tasting notes, although we're going to try to dive pretty deep into these, but more information on the detail pages on Wine.com for each wine. We have maps and critics reviews and winery photos and videos, so feel free to check that out later. The 4 wines that we will be tasting in order are the Jean-Luc Colombo, Coterone Blanc, the Priyare de Montezar Tavel, the Chateau La Nert, Châteauneuf-du-Pape, and the Jean-Luc Colombo Terre Brûlée Cornas. Before we introduce our guests, I just want to give a quick brief overview on the Rhône Valley because it's one of my favorite, probably my favorite wine region. Some of my favorite wines. I've visited there many times and I just love it. I love the people and the place and what you get to drink and there. So the Rhône, it is divided into 2 separate regions, the Northern Rhône and the Southern Rhône, and they're really quite different. Up in the Northern Rhône, you have these steep hills over the river with granite soils, and they're really focused on single varietal wines. So Syrah and Viognier being the main 2 there, Syrah exclusively for reds. And it's really quite stunning there and cooler. And also it's only 5% of the production of the entire Rhône Valley. So you're making less wine there and it's really small and concentrated. So then you come down to the Southern Rhône, which is just much larger. It's kind of sprawling, it's flatter with some rolling hills, a little bit warmer, and blends are the key there. So most reds and whites are blended. That's the norm and sometimes even the rule. So you have kind of 2 very different places, but the one thing that brings them together is the lovely Rhône River that flows through both of them. And of course, the fact that they both make fantastic wine. So with that, I'd like to bring in our guests and welcome Christoph Bristielle from Chateau La Nert, representing the Southern Rhône, and then Jean-Luc Colombo from Cornas, representing the Northern Rhône. Welcome to you both. Bonsoir. I know it's very late there, and we appreciate your time and being here. We're excited to taste through these wines and talk about them with you. I think we're going to be, we have 4 wines, so we're just going to start by tasting. So the first is the Lasa Bay Blanc. So I want to get into that with you, Jean-Luc. Because before you established your winery in Cornas, I know you spent time throughout the valley. Here's a lovely photo of the Rhône here. In the Rhône Valley, this is a Coterone Blanc. I know you're based in Cornas, but this wine is a Coterone Blanc, which means it can come from many different areas there. Can you tell us a little bit about the blend, the grapes here, the cépage, and also where they come from in the valley? The Blanc.
Okay, so first, thank you, Gwendolyn, because your presentation is very nice. It's very, like, I hope the wine, very well balanced. You talk about the Northern Rhône, you talk about the Southern Rhône, and we think it's real. You enjoy very well this area. So thank you so much. Thanks for your support. So yes, and we need your support. So yes. So the white, I love, you know, grape, the name of Claret, And Claret, I am just right now in Côte de Provence, and there is a summer Claret. You find also summer Claret for sure in Châteauneuf-du-Pape in the south of the Côtes du Rhône, of the Valley du Rhône. So La Claret is a grape with a lot of minerality, is a good acidity, is not a lot of alcohol. So for today, the war, global warming, all things. So I am not a fan with a lot of alcohol in wine. So I try to have a balance. And so it's two-thirds of Claret, 80–70% of Claret, and one-third or 20% of Roussanne. So you know the Roussanne we find especially in the northern Rhône, in Saint-Péret, in Saint-Joseph, in Hermitage, Roussanne and Marsanne, and here is Roussanne. But because over two-thirds is a Claret, so the wine, and when you smell the wine, you smell already not a lime, but like citrus lime or something not over mature. And when you taste the wine, I think at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, we can drink. We have to drink. And during the day and during the night, we have to drink. Very important. So
very important. Very important.
We have the best. Yes, we have a good acidity and minerality. And it is very important in a wine because you have a lunch, a dinner, and you eat, and you have to rinse your palate. So I think we focus today more and more on something with a lot of crispy, you say, crispy taste or minerality. It's not a Sauvignon, but the Claret is like that. So after, if you have any question.
Yeah, so it's about 80–20, and I love the Claret, and you're right, when you start to get higher alcohol, it just becomes too heavy. And this has the acidity and the brightness with the Roussanne, so it has the texture, it has the body, and also the acidity to balance. So
yes, and also, les abeilles, les abeilles is the bees.
Tell me about the bees.
No, it's very important because, okay.
That's your daughter, right?
This is my daughter, and she's a beekeeper. And, in the family and in the company, we need to have a busy bee. So this is the busy bee of the company. So and today the bees is very, very important because, you can talk about organic, biodynamic, nature, biodiversity, but it is very important to have insects. The insect is very important. And the bees is very sensitive. And we work also with Davis, the university in California. And so this is why we are very sensitive with the bees. So les abeilles, because I work a lot, we work a lot. And because we are very careful about the nature and the biodiversity.
And you do a lot for bee preservation to keep the bees healthy.
Not only the bees. I think I am the I think and I like for sure, and it is why I stay so young because I am something like a bit crazy because we love rabbit in the vineyard. So it's unbelievable for the yield. And the biodiversity is snake, is lizard, is insect, is eagle, is oak, is all the animals you can find in a vine, all around the vine. We need a forest. So the forest needed to have a lot of animals, and this is the biodiversity. And a great wine needs strong biodiversity.
Yeah,
very important.
Strong biodiversity, which is the rabbits are interesting because most people in America try to keep rabbits out of the garden.
No.
But I'm glad they're good for the vines. That was good to know. I'm sure my parents will love to hear that. They keep rabbits out.
And you have a lot of bat. We have a lot of bat also, because the bat eat a lot of different insects for the vine. Some for the grape is sensitive, so we need the bat. So we make decennies, 10 years and 10 years and 10 years after to understand the insect and the animals is very important for the soil, the ground, for the atmosphere, for the vine and the forest also. So we don't use herbicide and pesticide, and we are dry farming. It's very important to understand that.
Yeah.
But
I want to talk.
Is it too early to talk about?
I know dry farming is a lot, but I want to talk a little bit with that when we talk about the Syrah and what it does with the Syrah. But let's go to the Tavel first, which is, I'm going to say this on every wine. This is one of my favorite wines. This is one of my favorite regions. But I do love Tavel. Tavel is beautiful. It is the one place that is exclusively rosé. It was one of the first AOC designations in France back in 1936 with only another handful, including Châteauneuf-du-Pape. So it was there. The bottles are beautiful. They have the embossed on the bottle. They're in this flute shapes. The colors are stunning. Yeah, Tavel is just, it's a magical place. So I want to talk a little bit about the history of Priyare de Montezar, because it was a monastery back in 12th century, 13th century, 12th century. Which century, Christophe?
Well, in fact, the first written record of the priory, so the Priyare de Montezar, is from 1199.
Okay, so right there.
This is the first written record. It's when the king of France granted the monks of Montezar the right to settle the priory, so to use the water and to produce wine. So that's 1199.
So when did they start? Did they start producing wine that year, or just shortly after?
No,
when was the first wine?
As everywhere at the time, it was mixed agriculture. So they were very likely they were producing some grapes. I don't think they were making rosé quite the way we know it today. Maybe they were making what the English call charret, so pale red wine. But they were also growing cereals. They had a lot of, and I'm sure Jean-Luc would like that. They had a lot of different animals. Very much so, but I think it took a few centuries before the priory focused almost exclusively on wine and olive oil, actually, because we also produce a tiny amount of olive oil on the property.
Okay, so this particular Tavel, what are the grape varieties that are the cépage for this wine?
So And like most of the appellations of the northern part of the Rhône Valley, we are, of course, in the south. It's all about blending many grapes. And you have to think, as you pointed out on the map, the south is a very large area. And you have to think at it as an ocean of Grenache. Grenache or Grenache, as it's called in southern Spain, where it's coming from. So this is the main grape across all the wines. And here in Tavel, it is the main grape. But very much like the cousin across the river, which we'll talk about in a minute, in Châteauneuf-du-Pape, it's a blend of many grapes. So in this case, we have 7 different grapes. So very much like for Châteauneuf-du-Pape, where we have all the grapes that are allowed, here in Priyare de Montezar, we also use all the ones that are allowed. But the main one is Grenache. The proportion of Grenache is really has been really up and down, particularly the last few vintages. As Grenache is a very sensitive grape. So depending on how the spring turns out, it can produce a good amount of grapes or very little. So it's been really up and down. But on average, it's around between 50 to 55% Grenache in this blend. And then it's followed by Cinsault. Cinsault is a great grape because it's pretty much in our region the only grape that you can actually eat. It's a great stable grape. It's very fruity, rich in sugar. It's delicious to eat. And it's also the main grape that you find in most of the Rosé in Provence, just across the river. And then an interesting particularity of this Tavel is the high proportion of white grapes. Jean-Luc talked about Clairette a minute ago, and Clairette is the main white grape. It represents at least 15% of the grape. So it's blended also with a little bit of Roussanne as well as Bourboulenc. So overall, it's almost 20, sometimes just a bit more of white grape, which is quite unusual for Tavel.
So I want to talk. Yeah, go ahead.
I think this one of the reasons why this Tavel is so floral, and gives those wonderful delicate fruits and white flowers that you don't really find in every Tavel. You may also notice Tavel is, as far as I know, the only rosé appellation in the world with a minimum color intensity. So you cannot produce almost transparent rosés that you find more and more on the shelves around the world. I think on both sides of the ocean. But in our case, I think we are on the paler end of the color spectrum. And this is one because of this high proportion of white grape. And second is by choice. So in terms of vinification, one of the particularity of Tavel is the maceration of the grapes. No, Grenache sometimes it's called the Pinot Noir of the South. So you can make a Blanc de Noir with Grenache. So the color only comes with the maceration, so the skin contact. And typically in Tavel, it used to be around 48 hours, so 2 days of maceration, quite a long maceration. In our case, it's around 24 hours, which means it's slightly paler, and we like to do that to keep the freshness, the aromatic expression to the wine.
Yeah, and I was going to ask about why Tavel is just such a deeper, darker color than especially Provence and other places even around the world, even though they're using the same grape varieties. So the maceration, that time that the juice is spending on the skins to gain that color, when it's longer, or it gets deeper. So yeah, this is, I love Tavel. It's beautiful. I think it's just such an interesting rosé, both this one and Tavel in general, because it does mix that beautiful red fruit, and then it has that kind of mineral complexity to it, and then the floral notes that you mentioned are really prominent.
The particularity of Tavel is an interesting village because it's the only village appellation where you can only make rosé. As you pointed out, it was the second AOC recognized in France the day after Châteauneuf-du-Pape in April 1936.
I've read two different articles of the same day that it's got signed, and then Châteauneuf.
It's the day after.
Okay, the day after. Okay.
But in the appellation from the beginning, they wanted to preserve that deepness in color to make it very special, and it's still the trademark of Tavel.
Yeah, I want to also talk about aging, because I once enjoyed with you a Tavel over 50 years old, and I thought it might have been a white Burgundy. I had no idea, and so a lot of rosé is encouraged to be drunk young. So Tavel has an aging opportunity. Tell us a little bit about the ageability.
Absolutely, I think this. What I like to say when I talk about Priyare de Montezar is this is a real wine. It's rosé, but it's a real wine. It has it's not what we call in France a rosé de piscine. So I would never put any ice cubes in this Tavel. It would kill my heart to do that. I think it's what we call more rosé de gastronomie. It's a rosé that you can use with food, and it has an amazing ageability. We tasted together, as you pointed out, a couple of years ago when you visited 50 plus year old Tavel, which is very unusual. Yeah. But for me, the optimal drinking window is anything between 3 to 5 plus years. I think to really develop the full aroma, the full complexity and the balance of this rosé, and particularly our Priyare de Montezar, 2 years in bottle is the minimum.
Yeah,
absolutely.
That's fantastic. Since I didn't get to France this year. Next year we'll go back and enjoy some older Tavel. So I'm sticking with you to go to the Châteauneuf before we get to the Cornas, because it's a little bit the Cornas is definitely the fuller bodied here. If you can tell by our lovely slide with the arrow that is pointing over there to Châteauneuf-du-Pape, it's just across the river from Tavel. And Châteauneuf-du-Pape also has a very rich history. It means new castle of the Pope. It was named as such when the Pope came over back in the 14th century, moved the papacy over to Avignon and made himself a little summer home, and hence the name Châteauneuf-du-Pape. And now it's kind of recognized as, I don't know, the Grand Cru of the Southern Rhône, if you will. This is your property, Chateau La Nert, which also has a very rich history as well. Tell us a little bit about the founding of that.
Indeed. Chateau La Nert, Châteauneuf-du-Pape, what you see here on the screen is one of our cellars. It's not our oldest cellar. We
lost Christophe. No, lost Christophe. Okay, everybody else still there? Shall I just start talking about Châteauneuf-du-Pape? So when Christophe gets back, we'll talk a little bit about La Nert, but I believe La Nert was back in the 15th century. It is a beautiful place. I've had the opportunity to visit there, and it's lovely. And Châteauneuf-du-Pape, just for everybody to know, it allows 13 grape varieties, kind of famously 13 grape varieties to go into the blend there. And they're both white and red varieties. And they're kind of famous for that. It's like the 13 grape cepage that can go into a Châteauneuf-du-Pape. And so the blend is so important there. You know, we were talking about the Northern Rhône, which is that single grape variety, and then you come down to the Southern Rhône, and you're thinking it is all about the blend. Also based on Grenache, just like we were talking about with the Tavel. And so another thing Châteauneuf-du-Pape is famous for is the dirt. So we're going to see some dirt. So this is one of the first regions I learned about. So I love talking about the Rhône, but these are pudding stones, otherwise known as galets, and they're just kind of through the vineyards of Châteauneuf-du-Pape. It's famous for that. You have these old vines, and these galet stones do two things. They help to maintain the heat or absorb the heat and then reflect it back to the vine at night. And they also are good with the mistral, which is this fierce wind that comes through the Rhône River and through the valley and just flies through. And so these stones kind of help prevent erosion and kind of keep the soil stable. So is Christophe back?
I am. I'm sorry.
I just did a whole Châteauneuf tutorial.
I think
I talked about Gallet. I talked about the 13 cépage. It goes back. And La Nert having a rich history. I just forgot which century it was founded. Which one was that?
So the first written record is 1560.
1560.
We don't know when it was actually founded, because that's the first written record. We know that the cellar was already in existence, as well as at least 6 hectares of vineyard, because it was already in existence, and it was purchased by the Tulle de Villefranche family, which kept and developed the estates for over 3 centuries, until the phylloxera, the little bug that came from your side of the ocean, destroyed all the vineyards. And this family was very, very important to not only to Chateau La Nert, to Châteauneuf-du-Pape, but to winemaking across the region, because they, as you showed the beautiful chateau that they built on top of the cellar in the beginning of the 18th century. And it's very unusual to have such a beautiful chateau in our region. We have very nice houses, Mas or Bastide, but chateau like this, it's very unusual. And they built it because they wanted to impress. They wanted to show that they were making wine from the beginning, to sell wine, export wine, which is very, 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 very unusual. And as a matter of fact, I have in the archives, I have a written record of a shipment to North America, to Boston, to a Mr. James Baker, négociant in Boston, dated 1786.
Oh,
can you believe that?
Like
yeah,
pre-Constitution.
That's right.
Cool.
It's amazing.
All right.
So yeah, we have a very long history.
That's great.
Not only in Châteauneuf-du-Pape, but also with your country.
Yes, good. Yes, well, I love the place. I've enjoyed these wines. It was one of the first places we visited, possibly the same year we saw Jean-Luc. I'm not really sure. Anyway, but wonderful wines. Let's talk a little bit about this. I think you said you planted all 13 varieties.
That's correct.
Property, right?
So Châteauneuf-du-Pape is an interesting appellation. We are allowed to use 13 grape varieties, but very strangely, there is no rule whatsoever about the blend itself. So you can use 1, 2, 3, up to 13 grapes. We have all the 13 planted, and they are what we call co-planted. So we have 57 single plots, all contiguous around the chateau. But out of the 57, at least half of them have more than one grape variety in the plot. And this is one of the reasons why we don't know the exact composition of the blend. We know the big picture, of course, but we don't know the exact composition. It's also a reason why we do a lot of what we call co-fermentation, which means we co-ferment grapes in single fermentation vats. But the big picture is, of course, is Grenache. Is the main grape, but it's a bit unusual. The average in the appellation, the village, is 75% Grenache, so very little place for the other grapes. For us, it's only 50% Grenache, which means we have a much more diverse grape composition. And the second most important grape, which will be a very good link to Jean-Luc's next wine, is Syrah. We have around 30% Syrah 3.0, which is very unusual and very, very high. And followed by Mourvèdre, or what they call Monastrell in Spain, or Mataro in Australia, which at around 15%. And then, depending on the vintages, 5 to 8% of the other 10 grape varieties, including a bit of the wild grapes, because we have white single vines dotted around the vineyard.
And tell us a little bit about how this wine stands out in comparison to other Châteauneuf-du-Pape.
Well, I think
based on that blend.
The first is this very different blend, which brings very different aromas. Second is in terms of winemaking, we've been certified organic since 1998. So I think we work very, very hard in the vineyard. But in terms of winemaking, we are quite hands-off. We respect very much the vintages, the grape composition, the percentage of the grapes vary quite significantly, or has been varying the last few vintages, because each of the grape has been affected by the climate very, very differently. And we respect that. We don't follow a recipe that we apply year by year. And so I would like to say that I like to think as Chateau La Nert as the elegance of Châteauneuf-du-Pape. We want to make a balanced, a fine, refined, and elegant wine. And this is, I think this is what we would like Chateau La Nert to be known for within Châteauneuf-du-Pape, which means that this 2016 is already very approachable. I think that the tannins, even though they are present, it was a very warm and very structured vintage. Even so, it's so young. I think this one is already, the tannins are already fine and refined, and this is a very good sign for the ageability of this wine. And the typical Châteauneuf-du-Pape notes, so this a bit earthy notes, those black olive notes will start to appear in a few years from now.
Yeah, and yes, and I've always thought of there's kind of this silky kind of subtlety in a Chateau La Nert. There are other Châteauneufs that can be a little bit more powerful, others that can be a little bit more really earth kind of gravel driven, which is also delicious, but this is always kind of the more elegant, feminine, if you will, wine. So what is your ideal drinking time for this? I mean, now is I'm going to drink this tonight.
I think it's more, it's obviously it's based on taste, but it's also more based on the food pairing that you would like to apply. You know, when it's young, for me, this wine is young, I would go for a proper pepper steak, so a nice grilled meat. Maybe in a couple of years, I will go for lamb. We'll do wonderful rosemary lamb. I think will go very, very well with this wine. And then if you're patient enough, if you wait another 5, 10 plus years, I think any type of braised meat, so slow cooked meat, I think is a perfect companion with Chateau La Nert Red.
Yeah. Well, that's beautiful. So thank you. I love these wines.
Well,
They are
even
wonderful.
it's 2:30 a.m., it makes me hungry. I think I'm going to cook
Sorry,
something before
sorry.
going to bed again.
We're a little bit earlier here. So thank you. So let's talk a little bit about the Cornas, because we're going from this beautiful blend with Grenache and all these different grape varieties to Syrah, because in Cornas, you are in Cornas here in the Northern Rhône, which is exclusively Syrah. There are no white grapes in Cornas. And I know you make a few different single vineyard. You have a few single vineyards there, and you also have what we're having here, the Terre Brûlée, which is a blend. Like we said, Cornas, it's a very small appellation there, very steep hills on granite soils. This is a photo we took with you, your Jean-Luc, in 2015. This is my husband's photo. We love it. We framed it. Isn't that great? It's great. But it kind of shows the river. It shows the hills there on the river, how the vines are trained. And it's just, it's beautiful. But you founded, I think, your estate in 94, but your first vintage was 1987. So what stood out, because I know you've been around the Rhône Valley, for Cornas? What is special about Cornas?
Okay, so thank you, Gwendoline, again, and thank you, Christophe. And I don't want to make too much politics, but I can just add, when I make enology and my university in Bordeaux, in Champagne, and in Montpellier, in south of France, we drank a lot of Tavel. And we used to sell, this is the premier rosé de France. Donc, premier rosé, the first rosé of France.
Yeah.
And we love, over 40 years ago, the color of the Tavel. So a pink, a dark pink. And it was the best because we have not a lot of money for the charcuterie, for the pâté, and all the Mediterranean food. The Tavel was perfect. And I am happy, Christophe, and you talk about Tavel. So now we turn the page and come back to the Northern Rhône.
The north, yeah.
To the south of the Northern Rhône, because you arrive in Cornas. It's just 1 hour to drive to Tavel, and just 1 hour to drive to Châteauneuf-du-Pape. So Cornas is a very, very small and very, how we can say, narrow, small.
Specific, very specific.
Specific,
like
tiny appellation.
Yeah.
And it's just 150 hectares. So it's like 1 or 2 castles in Bordeaux. It's very small. And it's just 100% Syrah. Absolutely. So the Syrah is enough old. The average is over 50, 60 years old. And all the appellation is dry farming. There is no irrigation in the Cornas appellation. So this is a very, very, very steep appellation, very, very steep appellation, where the vine are on the terraces, and sometimes when you go, Aspen or Beaver Creek or in Colorado, or when you go skiing, it's a very steep slope, over 25%. Yeah. So if you look at the the vineyard is very surrounded by a lot of forest, and we come back to the biodiversity, we come back to the animals, to the insects. So you have 1 hectare or half an hectare is like 2 acres, 1 acre, 3, 4 acres, and a vineyard and a forest. So it's a lot of forest of juniper, forest of live oak, forest of pine, different varietals. It's beautiful, so wild and beautiful. And it is like when you visit Anderson or Alexander Valley, So this is very natural, and we don't have a eucalyptus, but the juniper, when you burn a juniper, you smell incense, and you find, if you taste, and first you smell, and take the glass and smell, and you have a lot of spice, a lot of spice, a lot of pepper, like Cambodian pepper, like with a lot of violet, and sometimes it's just a bit of mint, like eucalyptus. It's very complex.
Yes, and the black fruit. I think that what you're describing is typical of Syrah, but especially when it's in the northern Rhône terroir, because you get that black fruit, violet, pepper, but especially with the mint and the juniper is standing out on that as part of the terroir.
There is for sure on Châteauneuf-du-Pape, to come back to La Nert, you have the soil, the ground is a chalk, and you have the beautiful Grenache on the chalk and the beautiful Vin de Garde with the Châteauneuf-du-Pape. For us, because it's a pure Syrah, and I think nature is God, and we don't decide to plant Syrah. The name of Terre Brûlée is a Celtic. It's been 2,000 years ago. 2,000 years ago, we planted the Syrah on a granitic soil. And the granitic soil is acid, with a lot of acidity. It's a very porous granite. So the root with dry farming, with no irrigation, goes in the soil, but 20 meters, when you have a vine like 60, 70 years old. And so you have a lot of flowers, like iris, like violet, like lilac, and it's very complex. So this is the nose, and the mouth is more spice and flowers. You have more fruit, like when you taste the Grenache of Châteauneuf, you have more red fruit, the nice strawberry.
It's more round and
it's different. The flowers,
they're very different in structure.
Yeah.
So, what you're saying is interesting, just the fruit and roots, for the dry farming.
And, usually, because for sure, when we make the vinification, we don't keep the stem, so we destem. And so we have a very pure flowers and very pure fruit, or maybe the spice. And this is a vin de garde, a wine you can keep over 10 years, 15, 20 years. It's very important because if you take the Grand Cru Classé de Bordeaux, 20 years, you can have a Cornas of 20 years, or 40 years, and you can have a Cornas of 40 years. So it's a very vin de garde, and it's a wine absolutely not for seafood. The white abbey at the beginning with the claret is for seafood, but the Syrah Cornas is only for black meat, like ducks or pigeon, or maybe a nice T-bone with an arrow. So it's a wine you can compare as a vin de garde, and for the harmony, for the food and the wine, with the Aubryon or the Great Bordeaux. It's not. I think usually you have to wait some years, not to drink immediately Cornas. You have 18 and it's a very nice vintage, but today we need to open 05, 06, 07, 08.
Wait, I want to talk about 2005. We visited you in 2005, and first, the reason that we know the vineyards are steep is you drove us in a Jeep, and we thought we might fall out because you drove very, very fast. Très rapide. And then you cooked us a tuna. Look.
Absolutely.
That was 2000, that was 15 years ago. You cooked us a tuna. But yeah, I think
so
you caught
the
that,
tuna
caught
is
it that
just
morning.
for the very young vintage, not with an old vintage.
But that's true. 2005, that's 15 years. I think when we're drinking this Cornas, to think about how it ages, because things integrate and soften. And Cornas to me is that it's beautiful now. I can tell that it has potential to be even more beautiful. So how long would you wait for this vintage? Like what would...
Oh, you know, I say, unfortunately, the last maybe 10 vintage is a great vintage.
The 10?
All the vintage is very, very nice.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you have 15 or 14 or 17, 18. 18 is you can keep a minimum. You drink immediately, like today, 18, mm-hmm. but it's more for like a barbecue or a tuna, but this is not the right direction for the Cornas. I prefer Tavel with the tuna. But this you have to keep a minimum 10 years.
Yeah, this is, yeah, and these are...
And 05 is perfect, 05. 05, yes. You have the silky taste, you mm-hmm. have the perfect spice of the, like when you cook the T-bone and the smell of the roast, like mm-hmm. The roast of the bone, of the T-bone and the pepper and the salt. So yes, 05 is perfect today.
Yeah. So Cornas, yeah, Cornas I think to me is rustic, yeah.
I just want to come back on the vineyard because it's very important to say is a very, very I have a friend in the States who used to say, and he's very funny, they discovered Cornas maybe like me in the 80s or in the 1990 or 2000. They say, oh, you know, Cornas is a sleeping town and a sleeping vineyard. And so, oh, man, today in 20 is always a sleeping town and a sleeping, because Cornas don't move. It's very silent and the things are very slowly and so it's very small. So thank you to talk about Cornas because today people talk about, but it's so small, narrow. So yes.
Well, I recommend Cornas all the time. It's just some people look for that approachability, but I think that Cornas sometimes you can drink it now, but it does enjoy patience. It rewards patience. That said, if you at home have opened your Cornas, I feel like if you wait even till tomorrow, it will have opened and evolved even more. So sure. A wine with air that really comes out. So, and I do, so I encourage you also at home to look into more dry farming and organics, especially in France, as both of these wineries are practicing some wonderful things that are going.
And don't forget the rabbit in the vineyard.
Yes, that too. That too. But that just are going to, help our wine industry stay relevant as the climate continues to change. I think these are wonderful practices. They're delicious wines. Oh, thank you so much, because I was supposed to be there this summer and I wasn't. And so I feel virtually, I've done this in a tasting. I can't wait to visit again. Like I said, the Rhône, very close to my heart. I appreciate you both staying up and taking the time to be here and tell your stories. For those of you who were tuning in, thank you. And if you didn't get a chance to taste these wines, they're amazing. They are still available on Wine.com and you can find them there, as well as many other options for a multitude of delicious Rhône wines. But thank you. We're grateful for your time and your wines and your stories. So merci, santé. And
cheers.
Good morning.
Now you have
with the bottle,
the Rhône Valley.
Bye.
Okay, merci.
Beaucoup.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.
Bye bye.
It's both a science and a form of high art. It's made from the combination of grapes, sunlight, rain, soil, and time. It's raised up in the moments that matter. It's wine. And we are Wine.com. We have the largest wine selection in the world, online sommeliers with free advice, and now our powerful new app puts the entire world of wine in your hands. Wine.com. Seriously passionate about wine. Download our free app today.